Cryptocurrencies have once again entered the limelight, with Bitcoin and other altcoins engaging in robust trading, and unfortunately to the downside recently. But here with us to shed light on the current dynamic is a man who needs no introduction. He's Trace Mayer, a Bitcoin evangelist from the time when almost no one was talking about virtual currencies. Mayer is also the host of the ultra-popular Bitcoin Knowledge podcast, where he interviews experts and influencers in the crypto space. And this thought-provoking interview couldn't have come at a better time. Currently, Bitcoin dipped below the key psychological level of $10,000. However, Mayer encourages everyone in the digital markets to hold on, as he calls Bitcoin a once-in-a-species opportunity. We have an exclusive report filled with his insights, which you can find at crushthestreet.com/crypto. You don't want to miss out on this transformative investment, so please head over to crushthestreet.com/crypto. So without further ado, here's Trace Mayer.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amanduri, and I'm joined with the legendary Trace Mayer, host of the Bitcoin Knowledge podcast, early investor in Kraken, and just somebody who, was the John the Baptist of ushering in what we are now seeing in Bitcoin. Crazy, right? Donald Trump is now talking about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And, back when, you were advocating it, it was just like such a small topic, that, only geeks, right, would have known about it. And no offense to you, Trace, but, maybe just somebody who's very knowledgeable in the really abstract technologies, right? I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, but just something that was so early stage and so undiscovered. And here we are with it just making the biggest news headlines. And at $10,000 Bitcoin, approaching $11,000. So, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming back on and just being such a valuable part of, this discussion that we're having today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And, monetary sovereignty, that power over property rights vesting with the individual, it's very core to me. I think that's how we build a peaceful, sustainable, wealthy, prosperous society. And yeah, exactly like you said, when I started publicly talking about Bitcoin, it had less than $1 million market cap. I mean, now it's 200 billion, only 10 years later. And 5+ years ago, I was on Kaiser's show and we were talking about the geopolitical implications of Bitcoin. He introduced me as the world's premier expert on both gold and Bitcoin. And sure enough, stuff is playing out just like I talked about in that interview. Chairman Powell, Donald Trump, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, Christine Lagarde, the new ECB president, all of them talking about Bitcoin. Trump making this a political and an election issue in 2020. I mean, I'm not sure he understands that they're going into the halvening, that we have about 8 to 10 million AML KYC verified Americans, which is enough to way swing the vote. And we're going into the halvening, and we could see 6-figure Bitcoin next year. Like, if he's not a fan of it and he wants to introduce draconian stuff, there's a good chance he'd get booted out, like, real quick, because he's attacking people's money and he's attacking people's monetary sovereignty. And we're all a bunch of money badgers. We want our property rights.
Right.
Millennials have been so screwed compared to baby boomers. Look at baby boomers. They came into life when they were young. They had a rising, massive stock market. They'd just gotten out of World War II. They had interest rates that could go down. Housing prices were at all-time lows. No generation in history had been given a setup to accumulate wealth like they had been given. My father, he had his first job, 25.7 ounces of gold per month was his salary. That's about $500,000 a year. And we got kids coming out of college today making 50 grand a year if they're lucky, having all-time high housing prices, having negative interest rates on $13 trillion of government debt. And guess what? The millennials are stepping onto the political stage now. We've got the money, we've got the votes, and it's Donald Trump's either going to get on the Bitcoin train or he's probably going to get booted out of office. is kind of my way of looking at it.
Let me just jump in there, and I agree with you. I don't disagree with you whatsoever, but let me just kind of throw in the caveat. If we can manage our expectations, at least for Donald Trump, he's the president of the U.S. Like, his job is to be pro-America, and then to that extent, pro stock market, pro U.S. dollar, and
well, yeah, but
when the money is problematic for the president of the United States, as opposed to maybe another president who's maybe pro another country. I mean, I think you almost can say it's expected that he would do something like this and not be so pro something that would be competitive to the leadership that he's representing.
Yeah, but let me make a point on that. And I made this. I made a response to Trump's tweet, and he said the U.S. dollar. No, we have a Federal Reserve note dollar. The U.S. dollar, defined in the Constitution, is 371.25 grains of fine silver. That's what a U.S. dollar is, and we don't use those. And that's what made America great. And sound money is what will make America great again, not currency wars and competitive devaluations and draconian measures to keep people in an unconstitutional monetary system that's been punted on with Executive Order 6102 with Franklin Roosevelt, that made gold illegal with the legislature, and under City versus Dover, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case on what a dollar is in 1991. So we have all three branches of government punting on the issue of what is a dollar. And that's what made America great, was sound money. And that's what's in the Constitution. And that's what Donald Trump swore an oath to uphold and defend, is freedom of speech and sound money in Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1. So, like, if he's going to go back on his oath and not going to govern according to what he swore an oath to uphold and defend, which General Mark Milley said that that's what soldiers swore an oath to defend, is the Constitution, not a political leader. Like, that's what this is about. We're reestablishing sound money, and we're reestablishing freedom of speech. And so I find it incredibly ironic that Donald Trump gives a press conference on having freedom of speech with social media, and then the same day attacks Bitcoin, which is speech, because cryptography was upheld by the Supreme Court in the mid-90s in the crypto wars, and represents the future of sound money with extensibility. So, I mean, like, what you gonna do, Donald Trump? Like, are you gonna back the Constitution and property rights and freedom of speech? Or are you gonna be draconian and try to prop up an unconstitutional monetary system that you swore an oath to protect everybody against? Like, yeah. I mean, it's very binary.
Well, it's frustrating, right? It's not fundamentally sound anymore. It's not built on the right fundamentals, and interests are now not aligned anymore with what the Constitution has, right?
That's because it's political currency. It's not sound money. It's political currency. And so it'll lurch from one crisis to the other until it explodes in hyperinflation or implodes in deflationary depression. And look at where interest rates are going. So, I mean, like, what do we expect? We're using a fundamentally unsound, unconstitutional monetary system. The founding fathers learned this lesson with the continental dollar. The French learned this lesson with the French assignat. Goethe wrote about this in Faust Part 2. None of these outcomes are unpredictable. So, I mean, and he's the one that chose to make it a political issue in the 2020 election when it's not even 10 years old. I mean, if that doesn't speak to the power of Bitcoin and the sheer monster that this thing is growing and destined to become, I don't know what else would. I mean, you have four of the top people all talk about it in the same week. New head of the ECB, head of the Fed, Treasury Secretary, President of the U.S. I mean, this is becoming a serious issue.
Sure. Well, and I agree with you on that. I don't know entirely what to make of it, because we live in a system that's so nuanced, so multifaceted, and it's almost like, how do you control this situation that's so out of control? You know what I mean? And
well, you don't control it.
It's like, okay, I need to live my own life and have my own sovereignty, and focus on my family, making money, and what's best.
And
to a certain degree, right?
Well, and that's what Bitcoin does, right? It brings you property rights, because the rights that you can enforce are those that you can protect, and Bitcoin lowers that cost of protection. and increases the cost for people who attempt to extort. And so, if if Trump wants to fight Bitcoin, he's fighting economics. He's fighting demographic trends. He's fighting the latest, greatest technology that the U.S. needs for national security purposes anyways. And I mean, maybe Munchin like ghost wrote his tweet, or some banker did. I mean, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, because he's a busy guy and he's got a lot on his plate and stuff to do. But like, I mean, maybe it's brilliant politics that he wants to generate a bunch of discussion on what sound money is and then flip flop on that and make that an issue in the election. I don't know. But I mean, that's what I'd do if I were him. That would be a very good, strategic move politically. And then get the president's working group on financial markets to boost the Bitcoin price like through the stratosphere, like during the election cycle, and then come out and campaign on like, oh, we won't have any capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. I mean, that's a way to get a bunch of votes, because you're talking to people's wallets, and that's really what matters, right? It's the economy, it's how it impacts people's daily life. Just like what you said, there can be this mess in Washington, but as long as it doesn't really impact you, you don't really care that much about it. And that's if we're going to have the collapse of a worldwide currency system, because the U.S. government and other central banks, as Alan Greenspan said, they stand ready to lease gold in increasing quantities should the price rise. They're suppressing interest rates. They're rigging all the markets. All the markets are manipulations now, not markets. And that's what that's what Secretary Munchin said in his press conference. The president's working group on financial markets will start dealing with digital assets. Well, guess what? There's only one way they can manipulate the price right now, and that's up. And even if they do manipulate the price, they have to actually deliver Bitcoin on the blockchain. They can't just have a bunch of Bitcoin leases like they've done with gold. Because the cost to run a Bitcoin full node is so low compared to the cost to run a gold full node. You have to have a refinery or whatever. So they've got a real animal here that they're going to be dealing with Bitcoin. And it poses a critical question for the U.S. repression or regeneration. And so far, Trump has campaigned on regeneration, right? Cutting bureaucratic red tape, getting rid of the swamp, like all this stuff. But if he's going to go after repression when it comes to sound money and the latest and greatest technology with that, and Bitcoin is, because it's the hardest money the world's ever known, he could be in for some cognitive dissonance, and seeing that cognitive dissonance play out politically could be pretty ugly and introduce a whole lot of chaos.
Trace, Peter Schiff, a name that probably strikes a nerve with you going back a number of years, and something that I was there to watch your
that was fun, wasn't it?
But he just did a live Facebook or YouTube. I don't know if you saw this. This happened yesterday. We're doing this on July 16th. He did this live thing last night, Monday night. And, he defended gold publicly and basically took everyone's arguments for Bitcoin. And I just wanted to bring up some of the stuff that, he mentioned here. So the first thing he talked about is that Bitcoin is ultimately worthless over time. I mean, obviously right now there's a market for it in his opinion. If I can take his stance for the purpose of this for a second, there's a market for it. So there's people that will buy it and sell it, but only because, people think it's going to go up in value. But, he acknowledged, by the way, that he wished he bought Bitcoin way back when. Obviously the trade of the lifetime.
how can he not acknowledge that?
Right. You have to, at least. I mean, but while making these arguments, you have to at least acknowledge that this would have been an epic trade.
Well, I think that's great, because Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, he's talking with Wei Yun, and Wei Yun's like, well, let's kill them. And Dukat's like, no, we don't kill them. Dukat's like, a true victory is when you force someone to acknowledge your greatness, to make them realize that they were wrong to ever oppose you in the first place. And so it's kind of fun that like Peter Schiff's coming around. He's understanding like he screwed up bad. But I think to get more to your
hold on. Let me
okay, let's finish.
It'll actually address what you're saying there, because it's like, he would say you won the battle, but ultimately Bitcoin is not going to replace gold or have any sort of long-term 1,000-year-long value the way gold was. And he makes this initial point. He says, Bitcoin doesn't have any value in it of itself, other than it being money now. If it wasn't money, for instance, people would wear gold. We would use it in industry. But Bitcoin in and of itself is just money. And is that a reason for it to exist? If, gold wasn't money, it would be something else, right? People would want it for another reason. And is that a valid argument as to say, okay, well, maybe Bitcoin isn't as good as gold, and there is a reason for it to potentially lose its status versus something like gold?
Yeah, I mean, you made the comment about how niche and complex Bitcoin was. You got to understand thermodynamics, internet protocols, computer security, cybersecurity, private key, public key cryptography, thermodynamics, game theory, economics. And so what I see happening here is that Peter Schiff, he has a cursory, very skin level deep understanding of the Austrian School of Economics. He can say buzzwords, but he can't say anything of substance. What he doesn't understand is subjective value theory. What he doesn't understand is, and I actually wrote a paper on the regression theory of money, because this was a major topic with the gold bugs, and that was one of the first niche that I actually went after and tried to target, because of anybody that should understand money, it should be those guys, right? And so the regression theory of money kind of makes this argument, but it butts up against the subjective value theory. And Nick Szabo, he gave a wonderful presentation in Buenos Aires about how something becomes money, and it starts off as a collectible. We've had the monetary metals of gold, silver, and then we've had seashells. And it starts off as a collectible, and really, and Saifedean has really done a great work on the Bitcoin Standard, the book that he wrote, on talking about it's the technology or the thing that is the hardest to make. Whatever is the hardest to make, that's what becomes the money. So it starts off as a collectible, but if it's really hard to make, then as its price rises, it stands as a barrier against people making more of it, increasing the supply of it. So the stock to flow ratio. And that's why gold became money. Silver was money before gold, but gold outperformed it because it was harder to make more of it. And as a result, China and India, who were the last to switch over to gold, they lost 72% of their national net worth. So Peter Schiff, like, Bitcoin's going to be around a lot longer than him. He's already been wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong. He's motivated, I think, by an improper purpose. And you were there. You were the guys that had all the interview equipment set up. And you asked, like, hey, why don't we record this? And he said, I don't want him to make me look stupid. So he's more interested in protecting his revenue streams from the customers that he's milking, as opposed to actually discussing truth and economics and Bitcoin. And so, like, I just, when you're talking with paid hacks and paid shills and people that are trying to get money from you, like, you got to be extremely cautious. Look, I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling anything to anybody. Like, okay, I'm invested in Kraken, so if you speculate on Bitcoin, I'll make some money, or the other altcoins. But that gets to the point. That's within my investment thesis. I laid out the 7 network effects of Bitcoin, and the first one is speculation. And Satoshi talked about this. He said, it might just become something, so you might want to acquire some of it. It's speculation. That's what starts it off. And why people decide to speculate on something, hey, maybe they look at it and they see that difficulty adjustment algorithm, and they say, oh my gosh, this might become the hardest money the world's ever known. Maybe I should get some of it. So Peter Schiff, like, he just doesn't understand Austrian economics, and he's motivated by just trying to make a quick buck off of everybody that listens to him. So why listen to him is kind of my assertion.
Okay. Well, I think he says he's a smart guy, right? I would agree with that.
Okay.
With the caveat of him not being a Bitcoin guy, I get it. But I do like his economic analysis. And things that he.
But it's very skin deep, and I just outlined where the flaws are in his reasoning, which shows that he obviously hasn't read a couple of chapters in Human Action or some of Rothbard's works.
Right.
Why not?
And I would agree with you on it. And so I'll bring up another point that, and I'm actually more aligned with you on this whole, crypto thing. I'm a believer in it, but
hallelujah.
I like to flush through topics, and talking about, the criticisms of something is a good way to do that. So, one of the things that he brought up, and I thought it was actually a valid point, is that, the first invention of something is, never, the best one, right? It always tends to get taken over by a better invention. And he brings up, in the timeline that we've seen Bitcoin be around, even some of these ones that have come out a few years later, a few years is not a very long time. And he even brought up the point that, Bitcoin's only been around for 10 years. And he joked, he disparaged it by saying, well, I got a pair of socks that are 10 years old. And so it's really early to be saying, hey, this is not going to be overtaken by another cryptocurrency, or is this, really have deep roots and going to be around. It's still a leap of faith to believe that. That was his point on that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I was actually going back and looking through some of my records, and I had taken a class from the Mises Academy on network effects before Bitcoin was invented. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting that for whatever reason, I paid like $100 and took this class. And, the 7 network effects of Bitcoin are extremely powerful, and they exponentially reinforce each other. And if you understand Austrian economics and comparative value theory and cost of switching and all of these things that go into network effects, like, hey, guess what? We have a lot of protocols that are much more efficient and useful than email, than SMTP. But guess what? We still use SMTP, and we deal with a bunch of spam. Like, when a protocol gets entrenched, there are a lot of languages that would probably be better than English, that would probably be better than German. We could probably construct a language that would be better than a lot of the languages that most people speak. But guess what? You got to get people to learn those new languages. You got to get them to switch from the languages they're at. Like, the language you learn when you're born, plays such a vital role in how you actually think. All of this stuff. We have kids that are being born now. They're 10 years old, and they've been in a world where Bitcoin has existed the entire time they've been alive. Like, these network effects are real. Speculation, merchants, consumers, security, developers, and in developers, I'd put regulators and accountants and lawyers and, other professionals, financialization, things like LedgerX. They're a swap execution facility, a DCO. They're going to switch to become a DCM. We're trading Bitcoin derivatives there. World Reserve settlement currency status, because it's the hardest money ever invented. That's like the trajectory, the destiny that is going on. And there's nothing anywhere close that has security, scalability, and liquidity like Bitcoin has. Nothing anywhere close. So, his assertions, he's vastly showing ignorance when it comes to network effects and Austrian economic theory. I just, whatever, Peter, keep blabbing, keep being wrong. And guess what? It's great to have people like him. Why? Because Mises talks about this, and Rothbard talks about the role of the entrepreneur. And we all have asymmetric knowledge. Everybody knows something different than other people. And it goes into our economic calculation. And then guess what? The market allocates gains and losses based on who calculates correctly. And guess what, Peter? He's calculating incorrectly, and he's got losses. And people like me, we've got gains. And Bitcoin is going to be brutal in allocating these gains and losses, because it's both wealth creation and wealth transfer. Well, it's got to transfer wealth from the people who have it. Pension funds, corporate America, stock market, bond market, currency markets, real estate markets. Everybody, it's been around, and everybody's been able to freely choose. There's been somebody talking about it since it was a nickel and a quarter publicly. If you haven't bought Bitcoin, it's because you've decided to allocate your capital somewhere else. Now, why you've decided to do that, that's your own choice based on your subjective value theory. But you're going to be held by the market accountable for that choice with gains and losses. And so with this wealth transfer that's happening, nobody has anybody to blame but themselves if they don't profit greatly from it. So, hey, what you going to do? You going to get some Bitcoin just in case it becomes something like Satoshi said? Or are you going to continue to try and fight it and live in a world of cognitive dissonance like we see with so many people in the space that criticize it?
So just to reiterate, I mean, I think people can read between the lines. How long down the road would you say you'd be comfortable seeing Bitcoin being around? I mean, is this like, are you, I mean, because it's one thing to say, okay, it's been around for 10 years. I expect it to be around for my lifetime or another 30 years. But are you comfortable saying this is going to be the new monetary system for the next 500 years?
Yeah,
1,000 years? Like,
yeah,
what do you believe?
This is the new base layer of an eighth layer of the internet that's going to be used to establish trust, and we're going to build additional layers on top of it. And so the Bitcoin base layer is going to ossify, and it's not going to change. Like, we're not going to be doing forks or anything like, 5-10 years out. We're not going to be doing any forks. It's going to ossify, and then it's going to become something like gold. And why would there be any reason for it to disappear? Because we've got all these network effects and stuff being built on top of it. So yeah, I mean, this is a once in a species opportunity to shift from double entry bookkeeping to triple entry bookkeeping that has the hardest, strictest monetary policy or mission schedule that the species has ever known. So yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why Bitcoin's ever going to disappear. Because we'll build all these additional layers on top of it.
Once in a species opportunity. That's powerful. All right,
Yeah,
Trace. I want to end it on this topic here, and that is the Facebook Libra. This is interesting. Even Peter Schiff came out and like, hey, this is going to destroy Bitcoin because now we have a better Bitcoin, right? Better Bitcoin. And actually, we've seen this, and I thought this would happen, is that, they would announce Libra, this would get all this press, and it'd be a rising tide lifting all boats, even though it's nothing like Bitcoin. It's a stable coin. It's another form of the US dollar, but it's advertisement for blockchain, which is also tied to Bitcoin. And again, when you have this small vessel, getting a lot of attention, it's going to overflow. And that's kind of how I've seen this happen so far. But I'd like to flush through this a little bit with you and get your thoughts on Libra and its implications on Bitcoin, and just what do you see happening in this environment?
Well, I think Facebook they want to go after where a bunch of money is. And there's a bunch of money in the currency markets and in the manipulation of those markets and those interest rates and all the hypothecation and rehypothecation that takes place. But Libra is nothing like Bitcoin. Oh, there's also a lot of data, that Facebook could harvest with how people would be using Libra and stuff like that. But Libra is nothing like Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a global digital store of value that's not correlated. It has an asymmetric return. It's immutable. It's got that hardest cap supply, so it's inflation proof. It can't be confiscated. It's decentralized, and most importantly, it's censorship resistant. Libra is centralized. If they want to shut down your account, they just push a button, right? That's nothing like Bitcoin. I mean, the president of the United States, I'm not a fan of Bitcoin, but it's still here, right? Like they could shut down Napster. They couldn't shut down BitTorrent, and so BitTorrent's still around. It's going to be the same thing with Bitcoin. They might not like it, but it's going to be here because it's built to be censorship resistant. And it's built to harness the game theory and really set all these special interests at war with each other, because, hey, they might just need to get some in case it becomes something. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and a black hole on the world's balance sheet that collapses all of this debt and rehypothecation and the fiat currency fractional reserve system that's got, look at the Dole Foods case, the Procter & Gamble case. So what Facebook is doing is they're encroaching on the ability of the president's working group on financial markets to manipulate global financial and stock and bond and commodity markets. That's what they're doing. And they're going to piss them off doing that, right? Like, so, and Bitcoin, on the other hand, it grows organically. It grows one by one. So it's not centralized, it's grassroots. It's got much more of a foundation in that sense. You know, there's no one to give $1 million a day fine to, like the Congress and House are threatening Facebook with. So I think that those are a little bit of the juxtapositions. Like, sure, Libra might become something significant, but it's not even playing in the same category that Bitcoin's playing in.
Now, we have seen it correlate with the upward price movement in Bitcoin slightly. I mean, I don't know if you even want to, if maybe you would say it's not correlated to the upward price movement we've seen. It was happening anyways, but
maybe because it generates some press and people talk, and like any press seems to be helpful for Bitcoin. But like, I look at the 200-day moving average anyways to filter out all this daily noise. And Libra hasn't even been around that long. You know, that's why Preston of the Bitcoin Investors podcast created the Mayor Multiple. You know, it's because I look at that in terms of like what's actually mattering in terms of price movements. You know, Bitcoin's gone up and down 30% in a day. Like one time it went down like 35% in a couple minutes. Like Bitcoin, it goes all over the place. I want to see the 200-day moving average. I want to see the trend.
Right. All right, everyone. That was some serious meat from the one and only Trace Mayer of the Bitcoin Knowledge podcast, early investor in the space, visionary, somebody who, you know, understands Austrian economics probably better than anyone out there,
Yeah,
arguably. So, hey, Trace, if you have any closing thoughts here, I want to, you know, pass it back to you. Just share those. And again, thanks so much for coming on the show and again being a valuable part of, you know, what we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me and your work over the years. You know, that getting an insight into Peter Schiff like we did all those years ago. You know, I've always kind of kept a fork on his head so he doesn't bite me. But yeah, it's a, you know, Bitcoin Knowledge podcast. I talk with the top people in the space at Trace Mayer on Twitter. I put stuff out occasionally there. You know, just let's all be champions of monetary sovereignty. And we can do that by running our own full node, by holding our own private keys. Don't trust anybody with the private keys to your Bitcoin. You know, maybe for a short amount of time, but try as much as you can to just pull those private keys back to yourself, because that's how you really wage monetary war. And that's how you really take territory. And you got to take territory on that blockchain. And it's getting more competitive in order to do so. Just look at the price. So thanks so much for having us. Monetary sovereignty for all of us should be our credo.
Appreciate you, Trace. Thanks again.